Welcome to our summer series of No Filter, where I'm going to play you some of my favourite episodes from the year that you may have missed out on or might just want to listen to again. This is a bit of a behind-the-scenes insight, but I try to do just one No Filter interview per week because we like to run them soon after we record them so that they're fresh, and also because they take a lot of time to prepare for, and to be honest, I can feel a bit drained afterwards because it can be quite intense to sit in a room and talk to someone for over an hour. But sometimes you have to just work with people's availability. So there was one week during the year where I had to do 3 interviews in, I think it was either 1 day or 2 days. It was a really short amount of time. And 2 of those 3 interviews were with big celebrities, and they required lots of logistical preparation. Anyway, by the time I got to my 3rd interview with Gabbie Stroud, who's a former teacher who is not famous, but she's written a wildly best-selling book about her time teaching. It's called Teacher. In it, she also writes a lot about why she decided to quit teaching. So by the time I got around to number 3 interview with Gabbie, I was pretty spent, I'll be honest. I was a husk. But this interview turned out to be better than the others by such a long way. Oh my God, Gabbie is just amazing. Her book was amazing. I read it cover to cover. And she tells an amazing story. And it's another one that is mentioned to me so many times by people when they say that they listen to this podcast, and they always say it was one of their favourite episodes. Have a listen.
I went to my GP that afternoon and kept clutching at my chest saying, I think I'm having a heart attack. But I think really what it was just a very slow heartbreak, that the job of teaching that I had loved and treasured so much, and that important work that I had done, that I wasn't able to do that anymore.
From Mamamia Podcasts, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. When Gabbie Stroud shut the door on her primary school classroom one afternoon in 2014, she knew that she was leaving teaching forever. Between the growing curriculum, the demanding parents, who were sometimes nightmares, and the standardised tests like Naplan, Gabbie had begun to see her role not so much as a teacher or a guide or a nurturer, but as a data analyst. What started as a passion had ended up breaking her, and she's not the only one. Gabbie has written a memoir. It's aptly called Teacher, and it tells her story, but really the story of so many teachers. How she came to teaching, what our kids need from their teachers, and what finally broke her. I cried so much reading this book, and I didn't expect to, but the story she tells of some of the kids she teaches and the perspective that I'd never thought of before about the teachers that do their absolute very best with sometimes these very broken little children with chaotic, traumatised lives that come into their classrooms every day and then leave. It was such an eye-opener. And when I spoke to Gabbie, she said that she also cried when she was writing it because she misses teaching. It was her passion. She loved it. And what struck me about this book is how teaching is really one of the most undervalued, under-respected, underpaid professions in our society. And that really should change. It must change. Here's Gabbie Stroud. Gabbie, I cried when I read your book. Did you cry writing it?
Yes. Yep. I had moments where I didn't even realise I was crying. So I would go to the library most days to write, and I would have my headphones in and some white noise playing. And on one particular day, I realised that I was sobbing, the big cry, these ones.
The ugly cry.
The ugly cry was happening. And, I had to take myself out to the car park and get myself back together before I could go in and continue. But I'd really taken myself back to those places that had been very painful and really put myself into that memory to get it onto the page. And that's, you can't help but feel sad when you go back to those places.
What part of your book had you been writing when the ugly cry happened?
That was when I was writing about a boy called Leighton that I'd been teaching, and his dad was slowly and very painfully dying of cancer in Leighton's family home. And I was able to reach out and help Leighton in a very particular way, because when I was only a little bit older myself than Leighton was at that time, I had lost my brother and I'd known a home of grief. So I was able to bring my lived experience to his and connect with him in this really beautiful and personal way. But going back into that trauma to write it was heartbreaking and it was hard. But I'm glad I went there. It's a beautiful story to tell.
I'm glad you went there too. The part that made me cry was the story about Warren, which you told over a few chapters. Can you share Warren's story?
So Warren was a little boy that came to my school when I was teaching year 1, 2. And I'd been warned about Warren even before I'd accepted the position at the school. The principal said, we've got this very troubled little boy and, do you think you'd be able to cope with him in your class? And at that time, I'd been teaching for a little while and I had a bit of a skill set behind me, and I thought, yeah, I think I can. I think I could make a difference in this child's life. And for the first week, Warren didn't turn up, and we didn't know whether he would turn up. He was one of those sort of children that we'd probably describe as being fairly transient. So we...
what does that mean?
Well, they turn up for stretches of time and then they disappear, and then they might turn up again, or they can just vanish and you never hear from them.
And what does that usually mean?
It usually means that they're unsettled at school and that they...
But why would a child go from sort of school to school and turn up and disappear?
Bad things happening at home. Usually it's to do with people that are caught up in something illegal, and so they have to shift around a lot. You do see sort of transient kids too, whose parents might have jobs that call them around the country, for various reasons. But yeah, Warren was definitely one of those ones who his home life was particularly unstable. And we did know from what we could piece together that Mum had a drug addiction, but also was involved in the selling of drugs as well. So it was a really troubled home that he came from.
Tell me about that first day that Warren did finally turn up with his mum a week into term.
Yeah, it's amusing. I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was just terrifying. So yeah, a week had gone by, no Warren, and then he arrived at 10 o'clock, even an hour later than he should have. And his mum turned up, and she was sort of at a glance a real cool-looking mum, and then on closer inspection she was a well-worn, sort of a haggard-looking person that had, found out some things about life that some people probably shouldn't know. And along came Warren, lumbering along behind her, and along with his little brother Errol. It was unknown exactly how old Warren was. His paperwork wasn't complete, but he thought he was maybe about 7. His mum thought maybe he was about 7 as well.
She didn't know.
She wasn't sure, because I wanted to find that out, and I asked her straight up. I said, so how old is Warren? And she turned to him and said, how old are you? She wasn't sure. And little Errol was just a bubba. He was maybe 2. So Warren and his mum she just sort of said, oh, sorry, I thought I didn't think school started till today. Get up here, Warren, get in the classroom. And he walked into the classroom, both fingers up, giving everyone the bird with both hands, and said, hey there, motherfuckers. And that was how he arrived into his year 1, 2 classroom.
Welcome to my class.
Yeah.
And what do you do in that situation? I can't imagine.
You have to, as a teacher, override, the fight or flight or freeze instinct that you have, because you sense that, especially his mum, I sense danger, And even from that little boy, there were times where I felt fearful of what he was capable of. And as a teacher, what you have to do is you have to push past that, because you are in charge of alleviating the fight or flight feelings in those little ones that are sharing the classroom with that troubled child. So, what you try to do straight away, well, what I did, you try to make life normal. And that's very much what teachers do. We bring together these communities of very disparate learners, all different backgrounds, different lived experiences. And we do this amazing thing because we create a community. And that's... politicians struggle to do this, and yet teachers do it every day. We get all these varied backgrounds, and we bring them together, and we make it a safe place where people feel that they can take risks with their learning and try out new ideas. So that was what I started to do when Warren came into my class. Tried to make him feel welcome and tried to make sort of allowances for his behaviour and help him ease into the expectations that I had in my classroom. It was very apparent, though, that many of his needs weren't being met. And we know that if basic...
At home, you mean?
At home. And if basic needs aren't being met, learning can't happen. Your brain can't take on new stuff.
And how did you know that?
Because of his, anger and aggression and acting out at, on arrival at school, unprovoked. That, for me, as a teacher, always leads me to think, are you hungry? Because that agitation is, yourself when you're hungry, you're hangry. You get that hangry thing. And for a lot of kids, if they arrive to school in that mood already, either something significant's gone on that morning at home, or they haven't had enough to eat, or they're still tired. So, those sort of instincts within me as a teacher kicked in, and you start attending to those needs.
So what did you do? We
started to have breakfast. So I organised with my teacher's aide that when Warren arrived at school, whatever time that would be, that he would not check into the classroom first. He would go to the staff room, and we had Weet-Bix there, and he would smash through, half a dozen Weet-Bix some mornings, because I don't think he'd even eaten since, the day before sort of thing. I don't think there'd been an evening meal. And my teacher's aide would read to him and just settle him. We started to attend to things, teeth brushing and hair combing and face washing and things like that, just to get him set up and ready for the day and teach him some of those skills that he wasn't receiving at home.
And you'd make his lunch every day?
Yeah. We made his lunch every day. And at first I was sort of doing that on the sly. I'd make it at home and then bring it in and pop it in his bag. And then I started to make it at school for him, and I just would have some groceries in the cupboard, and some teachers cottoned on to what I was doing. And so then we just sort of created a staple of foods that were there that, and it wasn't just for Warren. There were other kids too. Sometimes kids just forget their lunch, and sometimes kids are still a bit hungry after they've eaten, and so they need something else. And then there are kids like Warren who just don't have anything. They come to school with nothing.
And all of that came out of your own pocket?
Oh, often, yes.
Is it really hard not to judge parents when you see such neglect in kids?
I've reached a point in my life where I think judgment is sort of a futile thing, really, to judge others, because you don't know what their lived experience is. My work as an educator has made me realise that when I see behaviour that I would think is not acceptable in others, that often it's because they're ignorant and they don't know any better. And I realise too, I'm a terribly compassionate person. So my thoughts when I look at Warren's mum, my immediate thoughts are, who hurt you and how did you get here? What happened with your own mum and dad that you think that it's okay to do this to your child? So education's the answer to everything. Oprah always says, when you know better, you do better. And I think that that's part of what I was trying to do as a teacher, was to break cycles and to teach kids that there are other pathways. And sometimes too, you hope that the parents would cotton onto that as well.
How did Warren's behaviour play out in the classroom?
Oh, he was violent and mean and cruel. You would be doing a simple activity, and it might be roll 2 dice and add the 2 numbers together. And if he didn't get 2 6s, for example, he would peg those dice as hard as he could across the room. And there's 30 kids in the room, so someone would get hit. If he didn't get to be the leader, I remember this one day, he wanted to be the leader in the line, and it wasn't his turn, or he wasn't there first. I forget now what the story was. But he put his finger over one nostril and just snorted out this glob of snot onto the child who was the leader. And it was just so disgusting and so repulsive. And it just makes me think, where did you learn that? Like, when did you see that you think that that's okay to do that to another person? So I found his behaviour, brutal and horrifying. He really loved scaring the other kids. He would just hide from them and then leap out and be in their face. He would hide their school bags from them. He would steal stuff out of their bags. He was mean and cruel and unkind. And you know what? Those kids, they would forgive him again and again and again. They tolerated his behaviour so much more readily than I did. I learnt a lot from those other children in that classroom that year.
What do you do when there's a kid who's so unlikable and you have to teach them?
At uni, a wise lecturer said to me, you've always got to find something to like, and then you focus on that. So that was my strategy, and it has been my strategy anytime I've come across a child who I think, if you were an adult in my world, we wouldn't be friends. I try to think, what is it about you that I can find to like? And Warren did have a good sense of humour, even though he could be quite mean-spirited in how he would use it. But he was always ready to laugh and joke around. So I used to try and find little jokes that were, acceptable and not highly inappropriate as the ones were that he would tell me, but, to share humour with him. So I think that's something that teachers do try to do, is just find something to hold on to, something that you can like in that child.
He started to go in and out of foster care during the time that you taught him, and you really became this figure of stability and caring for him. How did that play out for you?
I found it very draining. It was exhausting, and that was at a time in my life before I'd had children of my own. And on reflection, it's probably a good thing, because I had those emotional resources to give out to him. But I didn't have kids. I didn't know what it was to be mothering.
How old were you?
I was 26, I think. And so I was a little bit resentful that I was being called on to sort of shift into this mothering role, and I did find that challenging and draining. But I did realise too, and I saw that I was the single most stable thing in his life, and I realised that it didn't matter the quality of the learning that I was providing for Warren that year. All it mattered was that I turned up. Even if I was feeling a bit unwell, it was just better that I turned up, because he needed that stability and that person in front of him. And goodness knows it was better than having a relief teacher in there, because the whole class would go to rack and ruin, and then you'd go back the next day and be like, oh my God, I should never have taken the day off. I found it very troubling though, and I still can remember this awful day when I was putting him on the bus and he was going to yet another different foster family. And he said to me, so where is this bus taking me? And I had to say, I don't know. I wasn't sure. And I said, but the people who are picking you up will, they'll flag the bus and you go with them. And he was saying, but who are the people? I don't know. I had to keep saying to him, I don't know. And I promised him I will be here the next day. I will see you tomorrow. So just get through tonight and I will see you tomorrow, and I'll be here at school. And I went home that day and I sat on the lounge and I cried and cried and cried, because I couldn't help but think, even my dog knows where it's sleeping that night, And that little boy just didn't even know. And when you really inhabit that idea and think about that, no wonder he's so angry and cruel and mean and ready to lash out, because he's just so fearful for his own survival every day. For him, it's no different. It would be like what children feel like in war-torn countries. That's what his life was like in safe little regional rural Australia. He was living this awful, horrifying life.
As terrible as his mother was, and she was a terrible mother, by her own admission, she kept trying to give him and his brother to put them into foster care and say, I don't want them anymore, I can't do this. He still always wanted to go back to her. And some of the times that really broke my heart and opened my eyes in terms of your role as a teacher were the weight of some of the conversations you had to have with him when you had to be the one that said, you're not going back to Mum. And he kept saying, I'm going back today, aren't I? And you're like, no. And he's like, where am I going? I don't know. And then when he thought he was going to be back with her on the weekend, and then she changed her mind and she didn't want him to come back. And you were the one that had to sit down and have that conversation with him. Like, it's not just the teaching part that you had to do. Do they prepare you for that at university?
No. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just making that up as I was going along with Warren, really just going by feel and by instinct and by my thought of, well, if I was in his shoes, how would I like to be told this? They were just hard. It was just hard. It was a hard time in my teaching. They were hard conversations, and I wished every day that he would be away, and I wished every day that someone would come in and take the problem away from me. So I wanted the principal to swoop in and say, I will do those difficult conversations. I wanted his social worker to come in and say, I'll prepare the food for him. But, this didn't happen because they've got their own workloads. And he was, as my mum would say, that child was my cross to bear. So, that's just what I did. But when I wrote the book and I went back and I looked at that, I thought, oh, my God, it's a miracle I didn't quit that year alone because, you hear this, and this is the story of Warren. There were 29 other children in that classroom.
How did you get them through that year?
I still despair over the quality of the teaching I did that year. It would not have been great. I do think, though, that those children taught me a lot, and I do believe that they learnt a lot about tolerance and about understanding, and we did see growth and change in Warren, and we as a whole class sort of celebrated that and shared in that because it became our collective triumph when we saw him regulate his behaviour or to choose kindness over cruelty and things like that. But look, I've since caught up with some of those kids. They're adults now, and when I talk to them about their time and their memories of that classroom, it's sort of a blip on the radar for them. It's not a big deal. They remember the unit of work we did on transport and how I took the whole class down to the car shop. We went and looked at all these brand new cars out in the car lot and, had our photo taken and met the car dealer, and that they've got these kind of memories. And I sort of scratch my head and think, oh, God, did we do that? Because my mind and my year was just preoccupied with Warren.
I wanted your story with Warren to end well, and it didn't. It ended with him breaking his arm in the playground, and it was at a time when his mum wasn't around. Tell me how that story played out.
That was, that was horrible. So he was terrorising kids on the playground, and he went across at that time that school had a flying fox in the playground, and he slid across the flying fox and he lost his grip and he fell to the ground. He was a really big boy. He was, sort of too big for his little body. And anyway, he fell to the ground and we all heard the crack, and I raced over and he said, I've broken my arm. And somehow I managed to sort of scoop him up, and I got him down to the front office and we called the ambulance. And this kid, I can remember when the ambulance came, he was so distrusting of them. Like, to him, the ambos were like the cops, and they were trying to give him pain-relieving medication, and he refused it. He refused pain,
Why?
Just because you don't trust anyone who's in a uniform, I don't think. And he was like, nope, not taking anything. He had a lot of expletives in there. And, I'm not taking anything you guys want to give me, and I don't know who you are. And then in between this bravado of being, this man who can tell someone in uniform to f*** off, then he would whimper, mummy, 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 when's my mummy coming? Oh. And then, they'd try to offer him, the whistle that that you suck on for pain relief, and no, that off, and he'd physically push them away with his broken, like this, with his broken arm, he'd be pushing them away and then whimper, "Mummy, mummy, mummy." It was very traumatic. I went with him in the ambulance to the hospital, and eventually his social worker found his mum. She went and picked her up. She was drinking at the pub at whatever time in the morning that was. Anyway, we got mum there, and finally once mum was there, he agreed to take some pain medication, and they said, is he right to have, I'm not sure
morphine.
Was it morphine? Yeah. Is he right to have morphine? And she said, yeah, no problem, And she hadn't seen her child in months. And she's just sort of standing aloof at the end of the bed, didn't reach out, didn't hug him, nothing. There was no connection. And they administered morphine, and he had a massive physical reaction to it. I watched that child nearly die in front of me. His skin went all red, like someone had scribbled all over it. There were lumps. He was convulsing. It was just so traumatic watching it. And she was standing there at the end of his bed, scratching at her elbow and sniffing up her nose. And then she said, "Oh, yeah, that's right. If that's morphine, he can't have that. He's allergic." And it was actually at that point, thank goodness the principal had arrived at that point, and he saw something pass across my face, and he went and stood between me and the mum, because I think at that point I was ready to just grab her and shake her until her eyeballs rattled in her head.
I don't know how you didn't.
Yeah, that was the most painful thing to watch. And, look, after that he had the correct pain-relieving medication. They set his arm. He stayed in hospital overnight. I went to check on him the next day, and he was still there in his same school clothes. Mum hadn't brought him any change of clothes or anything. Mum hadn't been back to visit him. And then I just lose him. I just lose Warren, because he never came back to school. He never returned to my school. We don't know what happened to him. There was no follow-up, nothing. He was just lost to us. I saw him that next morning in the hospital with his arm in a cast and his dirty school clothes on, and that was it. He was gone.
I can't imagine that, because you guys had become like quite close. You'd gone on an excursion, and he'd tricked you into staying behind with him so that he could just be with you on the excursion.
Yeah. Look, I believe that child loved me.
Yeah.
And I know I loved him.
Yeah.
And, he had said to me on that excursion, he said to me, "I dream about you at night." And I've read once that when the kids in your class, when you are part of their dreams, that you're part of their quality world. They've assimilated you as someone who it means something significant to them. So I was always interested when kids said to me, "You were in my dream." And I said to him, "What do we do in that dream?" And he said, "There's you and me and my dad and Errol, the little brother, and we go camping." And that was, it was almost like his heart's longing, some stability and, a conventional family. And the idea of camping amused me too, because it was almost as though he couldn't even in his dreams allow it to be a stable home. It would be camping,
Yeah.
Mm.
You talk about how sometimes children tell you their secrets.
Mm.
What are some of those examples of when that's happened?
I remember doing a lesson once on what at that time was called protective behaviours. Things in education get rebranded and relabelled all the time, but it was protective behaviours. So it was about teaching kids, and it was with kindergarten. It was about teaching little ones early warning signs. So to become aware that if you're in a situation where you get butterflies in your tummy and your hairs on your arms stand on end and you get very sweaty palms and your heart starts racing, that these are early warning signs that you shouldn't ignore. Your body is trying to tell you that you're not safe. And it's a really interesting lesson. It's a very important lesson, and it's very interesting to see how kids respond to that. I remember one little boy, and we were trying to talk about times where you might have these feelings, and this little boy said, "It's going to be easy for me though." And I said, "Well, how is it going to be easy for you?" And he said, "Well, I'll know if there's a baddie around." And I said, "Well, how will you know?" I said, "You've got to rely on your body to tell you." And he said to me, "No," he said, "because a baddie wears a black mask and a black cape. And so when I see baddies, then I'll know." And it was beautiful and gorgeous, but it reminded me how vulnerable they are. They're sort of living in this comic cartoon world of what a baddie looked like. So on the one hand, I had this child saying this about baddies wearing black masks and black capes. And on the other hand, I had a little girl, and she said, "I'll tell you how those feelings feel." She said, "It's like when your uncle comes in when you're in the bath and he just makes you feel gross. And you're there with 30 kids and this has been said, and you're the adult that's been disclosed to." And I think that just that example shows the range of lived experiences that kids have. I've got one kid who thinks baddies are, cartoon characters, and another little girl who has lived at least once a very significant trauma. And so then as the adult and the teacher, you have this massive responsibility, because you've got to go and report what that little girl has shared with you. But then also you need that little boy to understand that little girl's level of danger exists also for him, but without frightening him or scaring him. But you've got to get him out of cartoon world. So it's a really difficult, these are some of the very difficult things that teachers are charged with in their responsibility and their work. And it's not, I don't think this stuff is very well understood by people that are not teachers.
You describe another incident in a school assembly when a child crawls onto your lap and says, "I want to tell you something, Mummy hurts the baby." What do you do in that instant? Like, I imagine there's protocols that you have to follow as well as your own. Are there two tracks, the protocols you have to follow and your own human instincts?
Yeah, there are. And I can't seem to turn my care off. My care levels are high. And so, I just held that little guy and I said to him, "Thank you for telling me that. That's important that you told me that. And I'm going to try and do something about that." Of course, it happens at 3:10 on a Friday afternoon. So the follow-up is fraught with problems because you're rolling into the weekend and you've got to get that little guy home, and you don't know, you're not going to see him for 2 days, and is his safety compromised? And there is so much that you're worried about in that scope of the weekend. So the immediate protocol for that was, for me, once I'd comforted him and thanked him for sharing that and acknowledged that, was to then have to go and tell someone else. So then I had to go and whisper that whole exchange to another teacher. And then it was dismissal time. We're at a school assembly. It was dismissal time. The whole school was dismissed, and then it's up to the principal's office, and probably about 2 or 3 hours in front of the computer lodging that as I'm not sure what they call it now, but, you go in and you lodge that as a disclosure, and you go through these websites, these screens and screens of information that, you've got to make decisions, how immediate is the danger that this child is in? And, well, you don't know. You really just got told a couple of sentences, but they were told in such a way that you do feel, yes, this needs to be taken very seriously. But should the police attend this evening? Well, gosh, I don't know. The police is a really valuable resource. Do we send them there because of something a child whispered to me at 3:10? So then you turn yourself inside out making those judgment calls, and then you've got the follow-up of all of that.
I know this, whenever any issue comes up in society, whether it's body image, smoking, dog biting, swimming, everyone says they need to teach it in schools. They need to teach it in schools. Cyber safety, everything. Porn, how porn isn't real sex, everything. And I always push back against that because I always feel that that's just not fair and that teachers have enough. What are some of the things other than basic, reading, writing and arithmetic that teachers are expected to provide to students as part of the syllabus?
Well, it's all those things that you just spoke about. So things like health is a really big one that's sort of permeating, like they've got to have fruit break now or crunch and sip or whatever initiative it goes under in whatever school district you're in. And fitness and keeping active and keeping healthy.
But not getting anorexia.
And correct body image. Now, at the moment, the current sort of trend is about mindfulness and being present. And a teacher was telling me recently that the whole school stops now and has like a 15-minute meditation, which I'm just so cynical now. I mean, that's a lovely idea, but my eyes cannot roll back far enough in my head at the thought of that.
Why is that?
Because it is just another add-on. And I think with a lot of these things that we do, and teachers feel this, we're doing too many things and none of them very well. So all these things are just getting piled on, and we're just paying lip service to it. Yep, tick that box. Yep, we talked about cyber safety. Yep, tick that box. We talked about being healthy. It's not deep learning. And I would really like for us to start thinking about, well, what is it that we want taught in our schools and how do we want that to be taught? I think they're the two most important questions we need to be asking, because I don't disagree. I think that there are lots of important things that should be part of our school curriculum. I think that we should be teaching kids about Facebook and social media and how we use those spaces ethically and how we write well in those spaces, the literacy that's involved in reading those spaces. I think that's important. Social media is not going anywhere. But if we are going to teach about that, then something's got to go, because the curriculum is way overcrowded. There's just not enough time to do everything that's already in there. So I think that question of what do we teach and how are we going to teach it is really the most important thing we should be asking right now, because either it is important or it's not important. And if it is important, then it belongs in our school curriculum. And if it's not important, then it belongs somewhere where families make a decision to teach that with their child.
Because there's a finite number of hours in the day that children are at school. So for everything people want to add to the curriculum, you've got to take something out.
Absolutely. It's an absolutely overcrowded curriculum. And I shout at the television every time I hear someone say, and now we think this should be implemented in schools, and now this should be added, and this should be something taught in schools. And I'm shouting, when would I teach that? When would I fit that in? We'll just keep them in at recess and lunch now so we can get through all these additional requirements.
It seems like there's been a bit of a generational shift. How old are you now?
I'm 41.
So when we were at school, parents had nothing to do with school. Like they didn't come to school. They knew who your teacher was. They might see your teacher once a year. It seems like parents have really made the school their place. And I've noticed it particularly, and this is a generalisation, but mums who don't go back to work after their kids are at school, and they're often really bright and high achieving and they had great careers, and for whatever reason they've decided not to resume them after they have kids, they start treating the school like their workplace. Have you noticed a real intrusion of parents into the school lives of their kids?
Yeah, I have. I believe that parents are the first and lifelong educator of their child. So I see them as a co-teacher along with me in that year when I'm teaching their child. But I think that their role as an educator is very different to mine. And yet I think that there are parents that sort of see their place as being, oh yes, I'll co-teach with you in the classroom along with you. And I think that can potentially be quite damaging and it can be quite dangerous. And I do think that there is a culture now where parents feel that they have a really strong place in a school. And don't get me wrong, I think, parents should always feel welcome in their child's school. And I think that there are often times when they should be there and contribute and really support what's going on in the school and bring their skill set in to enhance what's happening at the school. But at the end of the day, it's the teacher that's the teacher when the child's at school. I feel it now as a mum. I've got 2 girls. Olivia's 10 and Sophie's 7. And I tell you, I hate opening that school newsletter when that gets sent out on a Friday, because the demands it makes of me as a parent are just overwhelming. I just don't really want to come in for socket to November Day or whatever and wear my fancy socks and watch the kids parade around in their socks. I'm actually I'm happy for the school, but I'm not that interested. I don't want to do that. I've got other stuff I need to do during that work day.
Because I thought that was just me.
No.
Like, I do feel that as a parent, particularly when you're working outside the home, the demands on you to be part of your child's school life are massive.
They are. Book Week kills me every year, and I can't look at Facebook the week of Book Week because everyone's posting their kids' fantastic costumes, and I just think, oh my gosh, I can't keep up with that. Although it was hilarious this year because my daughter Olivia chose to dress as me for Book Week.
Because Mum wrote a book. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was, costuming was really easy. So that was great. But my sister had to do Sophie's costume because Sophie wanted to go as Little Red Riding Hood, and I kind of looked through our box of dress-ups and sort of offered her some shabby, possibilities. And my sister was watching it and she said, "I'll give it to me. I'll go home." And, and she stitched something on her sewing machine and made a beautiful costume. But honestly, I cannot remember.
Which will just make some other mother feel bad.
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember as a kid. I cannot remember my mum coming in to watch a book parade. I can't remember doing a book parade. We had an end of year concert. All the parents turned up. There was some speeches. A couple of kids got awards, and we all went home and see you again in 12 months' time.
So what's driven that, Gabbie? Is it the parents? Is it the school? Is it the kids? Is this somehow associated with helicopter parenting?
I think it relates to parenting, and that parenting has really shifted. So when I was a kid, if you were naughty, you were going to be given a smack or a threat of a smack. And we're worlds away from that now, and that's a great thing. But I don't think we transitioned through that period very well. So we took away smacking and this kind of discipline, but we didn't sort of become really clear on, well, what will we replace that with? With sort of time out and, stuff like that. But as a parent who was raised in a home where the threat of a smack was the form of discipline, if that's not there, then what else do I know? So for me, I know a lot of stuff as a teacher, so I would bring that skill set to my parenting. But a lot of parents out there don't have that teacher skill set, so they're sort of fumbling around. And I've had hilarious conversations with my girlfriends who have said things, they watch me with my kids and they say, "Oh, I'm going to copy that, I'm going to do that. That was really effective how you did that." And they've disclosed to me things like, that it was February and their child's been naughty, and they've said things like, "Well, Santa Claus isn't going to come." And they're like, "That's a long one to hold on to now till December, isn't it? That wasn't my finest moment." So I think there has been a shift in parenting, and we're still trying to navigate that. I think that we're living in a world now where we've wrapped our kids up in cotton wool as well. So we're very protective of our children, and sadly with that has come a belief that our little ones are entitled. And they're actually not. They're just like us, and they've got to learn their place in the world and figure it out, and they've got to have a few hard knocks, just in the events of life to figure that out and learn it for themselves. But this world that we live in now, where everyone gets a ribbon for going in the race and everyone gets to stand up and read their story at assembly or whatever, it's doing a disservice, I believe, to the kids that we're teaching. And as a lot of parents have really embraced that and bought into it, and it's really, I think, it's somewhat dangerous.
There's also a real sense of interfering and always taking the side of their children. Like you, on the one hand, you've got kids like Warren, whose parents are completely neglectful, but on the other hand, you've got kids whose parents are over-involved and will come up. You write in the book about this standardised marking and grading where you had to give some poor kid a C for their art project, and the parents were like, wanted to come and see you and had multiple appointments with the school about why did she get a C. How do you handle that? And I imagine there are also parents who challenge when their child is disciplined at school.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You handle that with great care. there's the strange climate around schools at the moment is they're operating under a business model, and as though the students are clients and the parents are the consumers. And when you think about that, the old adage of business is the customer's always right. And so as a teacher and as those that are principals, you're treading this fine line of trying not to piss off the parents. You don't want an unhappy client. I think education's always the answer. So if you can show parents another way, and if you can teach them and help them understand why you're doing the things that you're doing, if they're open to it, that can be a really positive conversation, and you can see some shifts then that can happen. I've had parents come in and they've been argumentative and ready to take me to court about something, and then we
Court?
Oh, yeah, because they'll just threaten that. I'll take you to court.
But for what?
For asking their child to have a timeout because their child pushed another child, or it can be just any minor infraction.
So they're going to take you to court?
Yeah. And everything, I believe this is how society operates now. Everything we're doing, all this hoop jumping and box ticking, is just a means of protecting yourself in case someone wants to sue you. This is, and in education, ultimately, this is what it is.
You mean all the standardisation of testing and grading?
Yep. Evidence for every single grade you provide is just so that if a parent comes in and says, I don't think it should, well, here I have 4 pieces of evidence that suggest this,
Describe that art class where a new form of marking had come in, a rubric.
Yes, a rubric.
There was which is a really great motivating term.
Yes.
Can you explain from the staff meeting through to the angry parent whose daughter got a C how that played out?
So this was the advent of A to E reporting, and so that was a measure of standardisation so that we'd all be grading the children in the same way using the letters A to E. And my staff, there were some very experienced teachers on staff, and they'd been teaching a long time, and a lot of them said, look, we know that this isn't the best way, so let's not do it. And we were promptly told, no, it's a government initiative, so this is happening, so get on board. So we were told that for all the assessment tasks that we did, we'd need a rubric. And so that's a grid.
What is a rubric?
It's a grid, and down one side you have all the outcomes that you want the learner to achieve. And then along the top of the grid, you have levels of achievement against each of those outcomes. And the levels of achievement get progressively worse. So you're excellent, highly accomplished, satisfactory, poor,
Phoning it in.
Yeah. So this was foisted upon us, and we were all told we had to go and have a go at using the rubric and doing some A to E reporting. And this was around the time, I think it was probably the year after I'd been teaching Warren, and I was in a year 1-2 class, and I thought, all right, I'll have a crack at this. And it was an art lesson, and the unit of work was self-portraits. And so I drew up the rubric, and there was more print on that page than those kids could even read. They don't know.
They were like 6,
yeah,
right?
7 and 8. So the word satisfactory, what does that mean, And then measuring that against these various outcomes, and
I'm still stumped on rubric.
Yeah. And they're the most depressing things, and the time involved in typing these rubrics up. So anyway, I created this rubric, and I decided to start the lesson. Normally, I would start my self-portrait lesson with, pictures of Van Gogh and Picasso, and, I'd bring in mirrors and we'd pull funny faces and talk about our reflection and, all of this, really get into the groove of representing yourself. But this time I started with the rubric, and I took the rubric in, and it was just such a depressing lesson. I mean, one kid, he had the rubric upside down the whole time. Like, his literacy was so poor that he didn't even realise that the grid was around the wrong way. And another little kid was so, just disenchanted with everything. I'm talking through this dry, boring rubric. He rolled the piece of paper up and was using it like a cylinder to kind of, stare out like a little telescope. And he was staring out, and then a kid bumped him, and he got this massive paper cut right underneath his eye, had to send him down to the office. So
That's not in the rubric.
No, it was comedic and it was theatre, but there was no self-portraiture done that day. No one got excited about it. So the first lesson was just the rubric. It was 2 or 3 more lessons on before we even picked up a paintbrush. And I love what children produce when you ask them to picture themselves. And, I pinned all their paintings up on the wall, and some of them looked like pirates, and some of them had sort of embellished themselves and given themselves, earrings all up their ear. And some kids are slow workers, and so they're bald. They never got around to giving themselves hair. And then, depressingly, once all their beautiful faces were up on the wall, I had to go through with the rubric and mark them and judge, which one was an A and which one was a B and which one was a C. And then the children came in, and then they got their results back. They got their grids with where I'd ticked and their results, and there were tears. One kid ripped their painting off the wall. Another little girl said, I'm going to go home and paint an even better one. I can't do my best work here in the classroom. It's too noisy. It was just depressing. And, when I was telling a colleague about it, she said, oh, gosh, it sounds like when Year 12 kids get their HSC results, the pressure that these kids were feeling. So then one little girl was issued with a C, and the understanding is that a C, if you're issued a C, that C, it's almost like it stands for competent. Yep, you've achieved everything. Good job. Well done. But these parents saw a C as being, 2 grades below an A, and they wanted their daughter to get an A. So they came in, they had a meeting with me, they wanted to see the rubric, they wanted to see the other kids' work, they wanted to see what an example of an A was. They wanted to know what qualifications I had to judge art at that level. And then the principal who had been so on board and who had been so excited and animated in launching the A to E grading system by about the 3rd or 4th week of these parents coming in to quibble over the grade C that was issued. He was well worn down. He'd had several meetings with these parents, and, they were threatening to take their kids out of the school, and they were going to take things further, whatever that meant. And, it was really challenging and difficult and just so unnecessary,
And Naplan, that was a bit of a straw that broke the camel's back.
It really was.
Tell me how that ended for you.
So Naplan sort of kind of crept in on us really in education, because there used to be 2 tests called Ella and SNAP, and they were a literacy test and a numeracy test. And the difference between Ella and SNAP and Naplan is that Ella and SNAP results were not then linked to a website, the My School website. So Naplan became the standardised test that we did all around Australia, and then the results were published on a website.
Called My School.
That's called My School. And supposedly My School makes it so, the website makes it so you can compare apples with apples, So you look at this and these are schools of a similar demographic, and this is what their results are. So you can supposedly see how well a school is performing. But I think Naplan's really an insidious sort of beast, because it's so limited and it's so fraught. And it has really contributed to this idea that that parents are consumers and we're just purchasing education, and that you can get on the My School website and just shop around like you're looking for insurance and get a really good deal for your education for your child. So I had taught in England in 1999, and they over there were doing at that time SATs, which is standardised assessment tasks or something like that. And they were national exams that children sat at the end of primary school and again at other times. And those results were used to rank the schools in league tables. And back in 1999, the league tables were published in the national newspapers, and it was a big deal. And back in 1999, I went to England and I was teaching over there, and I saw this happening, and I read the headlines, and I saw teachers struggling and stressed out, and I saw the impacts, and I thought, thank God I teach in Australia. We would never do this. I really thought that. I thought, we would never buy into something like this. And then I got back to Australia, and slowly over time, over 8 years, we got there. We started having this standardised Naplan test. And the trouble with it is that it brings in this consumer idea, but also this idea of standardisation. So this idea that just by collecting this one piece of information, we can suddenly know a whole heap more about a learner and about a school, and in turn about teachers and things like that. And yet, to my mind, all this data keeps reflecting is socioeconomic status that we already know from other data that we collect. It is just a snapshot of where that particular learner is at that particular point in time. And if you think about good assessment, so as a teacher, I know some stuff about assessment, and I know that we can assess for learning and as learning and of learning. There are all these different ways that we assess. If I'm going to assess well, I don't assess in March and then look at the results in August or whenever Naplan is. You know, as a practitioner of education, you assess to find out, to inform your teaching and to inform their learning. It needs to be an immediate sort of result and an immediate sort of reaction, so you can provide feedback to the learner and the learner can make progress and add to what they know and understand. So the very idea of Naplan being this efficient tool for capturing what's going on for learners, it's just not. It just doesn't fit with the philosophy of education, but also with the science and the theory of education.
We hear a lot about what Naplan's like for students. What's it like for teachers?
Look,
on the day,
look, it's okay. You know, teachers are pretty bomb-proof kind of people, and we are very committed to making things okay for our students. So it's a fairly sort of official kind of day. There's the unpackaging of the tests, and the desks the night before have been put into their rows, probably a few weeks before, because you've practiced doing it with the kids so that the kids know what it's like to sit in that sort of exam situation, and you've helped make it familiar for them. And, the tests are administered, and sometimes the structure of the day changes a little bit. Recess might be a little bit earlier or later, things like that to accommodate the test. And the test is done, it's packaged off and sent away, and presumably life returns to normal. You have kids that cry. You have kids that get distressed. You have kids that previously have been really stable, calm individuals suddenly lose it. You walk around and you watch kids that have misread the question or have rushed, and you can't help them. You can't prompt them. You can't sort of say, hey, read that one again or write a bit more on the, nothing. You've just got to watch them do things that you think, oh, that's not going to reflect well. But anyway. The thing I really disliked about Naplan, though, was that time when the results came in, and then we would sit there as a staff, and all schools are different, but at my school we would bring the graphs up on the interactive whiteboard, and we'd sit and look at them and talk about, how students were going, and does this look at these results in spelling? Does this mean we need to look at our spelling program? That really just jarred with me, because we were forever saying to the kids, it doesn't mean anything. Just try your best. We're not too concerned about your results. And then we would sit and analyse them, and I didn't like that. It felt very much like a double standard. I don't feel comfortable with it. Yeah.
Gabbie, why did you decide to leave teaching?
It was a sort of a slow decline, and I do say that I didn't leave teaching. Teaching left me. It gradually morphed into something that wasn't what I was called to do. So about 2 years before I left teaching, I had this moment in the classroom, and I write about it in the book in the opening chapter, where it's just a pretty typical afternoon in kindergarten. It's a sweltering hot day at the beginning of the year. The kids are exhausted. The cicadas are really loud outside the classroom. A child's had a blood nose. A parent has come to the door to collect their child early, and I've had to redirect her down to the office to sign the slip to come back to collect the child. I've got a little one called Grayson, and he wants me to sort out his shoe. It's in a really big knot, and his shoelace, and it's too tight on his foot. When I don't attend to Grayson immediately, he lashes out at another child, and a child gets a kick to the head. So I'm comforting that child. A little boy's nearly wetting his pants. And meanwhile, I'm trying to get them to do an art and craft activity where we make a green sheep based on Mem Fox and Judy Horakeck's book, Where is the Green Sheep? So there's wood glue and there's tissue paper, and it's just a typical chaotic kindergarten afternoon. Somehow in all that chaos, Grayson seems to wrangle the power from me, the little boy with the knotted shoe. And he starts this movement where he gets under his desk and pushes his feet up against the desk and makes the desk go thunk onto the ground. He lifts it with his feet and then lets it drop. And other kids see this and think, yeah, I'm going to get amongst that as well. And they're under their desks and all the desks are thunking. And I just had sort of lost control of the afternoon, I think. And Grayson is so frustrated with me for not untying his shoe that he gets the shoe and he throws it at me across the classroom. And for whatever reason, lucky throw for Grayson, but the shoe hit me, and it hit me right in the chest, right at my heart. And it was like at that moment something broke inside me, and I picked the shoe up, I opened the classroom door, and I threw the shoe way out into the playground, and I shouted, "Enough!" And I slammed the door and I turned around, and all these little ones, you know, they're kindergarten, little 6-year-olds, they looked at me. They were terrified. They were really scared. But I remember my heart was racing. My breath was coming hard and fast. I was the one who was the most terrified. And I started to realise at that point that something was wrong with me. That I don't behave like that. Even on my worst day with my own kids, I'm not a shoe thrower. That's not how I behave. I'm not aggressive and angry like that. And really losing my shit like that in the classroom that day, I knew something was wrong. Something was really wrong with me. And I lasted 2 years after that. But I realised that the work I was doing, that just attending to endless need and much of it not really in my job description, it had broken something in me and I just wasn't coping. So fast forward 2 years on from that, and I'm in another chaotic kindergarten classroom, and I'm rushing this little boy who couldn't do his assessment task. He was struggling through the end of kinder assessment. I knew that he didn't know the answers to these questions, and yet I still had to push him through the test to get the data, to put in the spreadsheet, to send to Canberra, to get the funding. And again, I just was there, and I didn't lose my cool that day. I just had this very sort of, wasn't a quiet feeling, but it was a very sure feeling that I'm not teaching anymore. I'm doing something. I'm collecting data, I think. That's what I was doing, but it wasn't teaching. And I got this, ironically, again, I got this pain in the chest, almost right where Grayson's shoe had hit me 2 years earlier. And I really thought I was having a heart attack. I went to my GP that afternoon and kept clutching at my chest saying, I think I'm having a heart attack. But I think really what it was just a very slow heartbreak, that the job of teaching that I had loved and treasured so much, and that important work that I had done affecting lives and touching lives like Warren's life, that I wasn't able to do that anymore. So crowded and busy and standardised was the curriculum and the days in the classroom, that what I was doing was very far removed from the teaching.
How long have you been out of the education system?
So I left having my, in inverted commas, heart attack in 2014, and I had 2015 to think about it, to think whether I wanted to leave that permanent position. And permanent positions are very hard to come by. By October of that next year, I knew I wasn't going back, and I sent in my letter of resignation. So it's been officially, I've been out of the system since 2015, but my last real day in a classroom was in 2014.
And what have you been doing since then?
Recovering. I think I'm pretty sure I had post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sounds like you did.
Yeah, that year of 2015 when my own daughter, my little Olivia, she was in year 1 that year, and I couldn't even go near the school. It was an effort to go in and see her in her school concert. I never went and saw her receive an award at assembly, or I couldn't help it. Tuck shop or any of those constant demands that school makes. I couldn't even go near the place to pick her up from school. I used to park down the road and she'd have to walk down for me to collect her from school.
Did she go to the school where you taught?
Yeah, she went to the school. She was in my last year of teaching. She was in my kindergarten class, so.
You taught her?
Yeah, I taught her.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
which was beautiful. It was a very special year that year. And in hindsight, I think maybe a part of me knew that was my last year, because there were some really very special magic moments in amongst all the trauma of leaving. Yeah.
And so what do you do now?
Well,
besides being a best-selling author?
Yes, my best-selling author
Yeah.
role. Yeah, so writing. I'm doing lots of writing, and at the moment just really talking about the book. There's so much interest in this story, so I'm doing lots of work with teachers and meeting teachers, and every time I do an event I meet all these teachers who are just like me, and they're feeling quite broken and strung out, and so just connecting with those people and letting them know they're not the only ones, and that it's actually not us, it's the system that's failing us and making us feel like that. Along with that, I just do a bunch of other jobs. I care for a little boy who has a disability, and so I go into his home and support him in the afternoons and help him get his schoolwork done and his homework and things like that. So that really plays to my teacher skill set, and we have some really fun times together. And I manage storage sheds in my local town because as a teacher, my skill set of managing and communicating is highly valuable. And I also, when university is in session and when I'm not promoting a book, I also teach at tertiary level for people, crazy people who think they might like to be a teacher. I teach a couple of subjects at uni. So, yeah.
Gabbie, thank you for writing this book. It was such an eye-opener for me, and I think every person who's had a teacher and every person who's had a child should read this book. Teachers, like nurses, are just some of the great unsung heroes in our society, and you've done a great service by really laying out what it's like. It's interesting, the cover of your book, or the back of your book, has a whole apple, and the cover of your book has an apple, just the core. And I thought that was a really interesting choice, and I hope that teaching isn't, that you're not lost to us in terms of teaching, because your voice and your skill is just so wonderful, and I hope that you can do whatever it takes to teach in some way. If it's not a school, it sounds like you're already doing that, teaching the teachers.
Thank you. And providing platforms like this gets the message out there, so thank you for supporting it and putting that voice out there. It's really important, and I thank you for that.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. You can buy Gabbie Stroud's wonderful book, Teacher, at apple.co/Mamamia, where you will find all the books of the many, many interesting authors and people that we've interviewed here on No Filter. If you're wondering what to listen to next, why not subscribe to our family life podcast, This Glorious Mess? It's hosted by Holly Wainwright and Andrew Daddo. They are hilarious. And if you're a parent of little kids or big kids or even grown-up kids, you are going to love this show. Next week on No Filter, what do you do when the love of your life dies? No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff, and I'm Mia Friedman. I will see you on Mamamia.